Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 8 of the Burgh Breakdown. An exciting time in Pittsburgh sports. The Pirates are trying to find their footing following the trade deadline, climb back up into the wild card standings. The Steelers are preparing for their first preseason game in just under a week, and the Pittsburgh Penguins, like it or not, are making some moves in the month of August. So we'll talk about all that and more here on this episode of the Burgh Breakdown, but wanted to kick things off with Oneil Cruz, and the question that has been rattling around in my brain: are we about to see the best version of Oneil Cruz that we have ever seen? He was off to a terrific start at the beginning of this season, hitting .256, had 14 home runs, 44 RBIs in just 64 games played. Well on his way to potentially a 30 home run season, a 100 RBI season, maybe a 30 stolen base season, and then it all came crashing down when he suffered a left hand fracture that landed him on the IL on June 10th. He's been out ever since, but he is starting to get closer to his return. In fact, he's eligible to return this weekend during the New York Mets series. Probably not something that we can expect, probably not something that's going to wind up happening because, well, he hasn't started a rehab assignment yet. We have heard that he is cleared for baseball activities, but as of this recording, he hasn't begun a rehab assignment. But regardless, he will be healthy at some point in the next several weeks. He will be back at some point in the next several weeks. And to me, it feels like we are about to see the best version of Cruz we've ever seen. As of this recording, there is 47 games left in the Pirates' regular season. We've always seen Oneil Cruz go off in short stretches, whether that's the beginning of this season where he had, I believe, an over 300 batting average through the month of April, whether that's a few seasons back when he was lighting the world on fire early before crumbling down the tail end. But baseball is a marathon, and that's always been the biggest challenge for Oneil Cruz. How can he continue to impact the game for 162 games? The thing is, that's not going to be a problem once he returns. He's had his legs throughout this entire process. The injury was to his left hand. So he's still been able to train his lower body. He's still not trying to come back from anything with his lower body. And he's rested that lower body for the past 60 plus days. So he should be ready, theoretically, with a full tank to go leave it all out on the field for the last however many games, 40 or less games of the Pittsburgh Pirates season. And the thing is, the Pirates desperately need him. His return immediately impacts two areas that have been plaguing the Pirates for the past month. First, the defense. I know. I know some of you giggled. I know some of you rolled your eyes. But defensively, there is no substitution for his arm talent in the outfield. Just the mere threat of his arm is going to slow down opposing teams' base running tactics. They're going to think twice if Oneil Cruz is coming up to try to throw him out at home, specifically if the alternative is Jake Mangum, who has played center field well in the absence of Cruz, but has nowhere near the arm talent that Oneil Cruz has. And secondly, Jake Mangum doesn't have the range that Oneil Cruz has. And this is a conversation that I have with people, not just about Cruz, but with Connor Griffin as well. Yeah, getting them back helps their position. You obviously get a center fielder who can get to some of those line drive balls a lot quicker than a Jake Mangum can. But it also cuts down the distance and the overall surface area that Esmeralda Valdez needs to cover in right field, that Brian Reynolds needs to cover in left field. If you want to take it to the shortstop position, Connor Griffin's insane range that ultimately wound up getting him hurt in that game against the Nationals on 4th of July weekend helps Nick Gonzalez worry about covering less ground as a third baseman. It helps Brandon Lau worry about having to cover less ground as a second baseman. It allows your defensive players around these guys, these Griffins and these Cruzes, to be able to just focus on a few things, which ultimately winds up turning into successful defensive plays. That's why early in the season and when Connor Griffin was healthy, Brandon Lau was one of the biggest surprises of the entire season defensively. Yeah, his offense has been great, but this is a guy that everybody expected to be among the worst, if not the worst, defensive second baseman in the entire National League coming into this season, and he had a positive defensive runs saved. He had a positive outs above average. He was playing at a very high level at second base when Connor Griffin was at shortstop. I think you can take that entire philosophy, copy it, and paste it into center field with Oneil Cruz. You get Cruz back, your defense improves. Yeah, you're going to have the occasional blunder and the occasional, misplay from Oneil Cruz. But all the other plays that he makes that look routine are the ones that are currently going over center fielders' heads for doubles and dropping in front of center fielders for massive hits with runners in scoring position. So I think defensively, getting Oneil Cruz back is going to be massive. And then the other area, one that a lot of people were pounding the table for them to address at the trade deadline, hitting against lefties. Oneil Cruz was one of the worst batters against lefties in 2025. But against lefties in 2026, he's one of the best on the Pirates, hitting .312 with an .868 OPS against left-handed pitching this year. A complete 180 for Oneil Cruz. And as we all know, the Pirates are among the worst teams in the MLB against left-handed starting pitching. It's talked about every single time a lefty is in the probable starters for the opposing team. Well, that's going to be a loss for the Pirates. They're not going to be able to beat them because a lefty's on the mound. A crafty lefty is the quote that always goes out there. You get Oneil Cruz back, you have him in center field, and you don't have to take him out based on who's the starting pitcher the following day. He's always a threat, not just to make contact. He's always a threat to take the ball out of the ballpark. And getting that back is an invaluable thing for this Pittsburgh Pirates team. So you look at Oneil Cruz, and coming into the season, this was the storyline. Coming into any season, since Cruz has really broken out as an everyday player, he's always been the X factor. And he has a chance to truly take over a short spurt, the last 30 to 40 games, once he returns. And for the first time, he gets the chance to do that during a playoff push. I think the version of Oneil Cruz that we're about to see is going to be a completely different animal than anything we have seen before. And considering how much of an alien, a freak athlete he is, it could be something truly special that we watch over the last 6 weeks of the season. Let's talk a little bit about the Pittsburgh Steelers as they are already closing in on the beginning of the preseason. Their first preseason game in just under a week. Shoot, we watched the Hall of Fame game last night. Kenny Pickett taking the field for the Carolina Panthers. I mean, we'll leave that at that. But as far as the Steelers are concerned, one of the fan base's biggest complaints under the entire Tomlin era, specifically under Matt Canada and Artie Smith, is their lack of effective tight end usage. Not only effective, it wasn't even a lack. It felt like they entirely dismissed the idea of utilizing tight ends in the correct manner, the manner that every other team has been using tight ends over the past decade. I would expect, and I think it's fair to expect, that that's going to change under Mike McCarthy. I think anybody who has watched any Mike McCarthy coach team, whether that's the Dallas Cowboys of the early 2020s or the Green Bay Packers of the 2010s, Mike McCarthy likes them some tight ends, right? We look back specifically at the Cowboys because that's the most recent sample size that we've seen. In 2023, Jake Ferguson finished with 761 yards receiving. In 2021, Dalton Schultz finished with 808 yards receiving. In 2020, Schultz again finished with 615 yards. Meanwhile, under the tutelage of Matt Canada and Artie Smith, Pat Freiermuth is averaging 583 yards a season, below all three of the three Cowboys that I just mentioned. Darnell Washington is starting to gain some momentum, but still averaging just 213 yards per season. He has a smaller sample size, but he is tight end number 2, or has been tight end number 2 for the Pittsburgh Steelers. I would imagine that this season we see both see elevated usage. The question becomes, how will they utilize them? I think Pat Freiermuth is going to be the guy. Like, I enjoy Darnell Washington. I think that he is going to have a very big role for this Pittsburgh Steelers team, particularly on third down. I mean, anytime you can just dump it 3 yards down the field, even if it's 3rd and 7, and you have a over 60% chance that Darnell Washington is going to be able to carry 2 and or 3 players for the first down, that's a weapon. And I expect them to utilize that weapon to the fullest extent. But I think down in and down out, drive in and drive out, it's going to be Pat Freiermuth who steps up the most for that tight end room. And it's something we've all been waiting for. We've all wanted to see Pat Freiermuth get utilized in the way that his talent seemingly is supposed to be used. You look at, the way that he's been utilized in his career by those 2 offensive coordinators, and it was just, well, you might be part of the game plan as a safety valve, but we're not going to actually make you a focal point unless it's against the Cincinnati Bengals. Right? That's the funniest part of Pat Freiermuth, is he is a Hall of Fame level tight end against the Cincinnati Bengals, and then they just don't utilize him against anyone else in that same fashion. I don't get it. I don't understand it. It made no sense. I understood that, hey, it's a matchup thing, but you're telling me that the Bengals are the only team that creates a matchup defensively to where Pat Freiermuth is the guy you need to go to. Against the Bengals in his career, Pat Freiermuth has 619 yards. The second highest total yardage against any opponent from Muth is half of that, 297 against the Cleveland Browns. So what I want to see going into this year is Pat Freiermuth becoming the next Dalton Schultz. I want to see Pat Freiermuth becoming the next Jake Ferguson. I want to see him be a focal point of this Pittsburgh Steelers offense. And then it's going to be difficult to get the ball around, because what we're seeing now is the Steelers go from a team that didn't have a lot of weapons, and Freiermuth wasn't getting the ball, to a team that has a lot of weapons, and you could all of a sudden see Freiermuth start getting the ball. You have DK Metcalf on the outside, and you know why they can't double him? Because they have Michael Pittman Jr. on the other side. And as of right now, it feels like Roman Wilson might be poised to step up and take a more significant role. Jeremy Bernard is thought of very highly around the fan base. So you have all of these pieces, not to mention your offensive line should be able to take a step forward and give your quarterback just a little bit more time. Maybe that extra time can be used to develop more than just a check down route for Pat Freiermuth and for Darnell Washington. So I'm expecting big things from the tight end room this year, and I'm expecting big things specifically from Pat Freiermuth in the 2026 season. Welcome back to the Burgh Breakdown. I'm going to close things out with a little Pittsburgh Penguins conversation here. The Pens made some headlines yesterday, and honestly, I didn't have it on my bingo card, and I don't know if anybody else did. I think I led off a show yesterday saying the same exact thing, but it's the facts. Nobody expected to see Ville Koivunen sign for 8 years at $4 million. $4 million, sure. But if I was thinking prior to this news coming out that Ville Koivunen's next contract was going to be $4 million, I would have thought, okay, that's a 2-year bridge deal to see what you got in the guy. That's why you're paying $4 million, because you want to have him for a short term and you want to see what he's got. 8 years at $4 million is a break the mold type of contract. We know we're entering uncharted territories when it comes to the NHL and its salary cap. So we've seen that start to permeate into the contract situations around the NHL. Hence, Leo Carlsson getting $18 million. Hence, Macklin Celebrini getting $18.8 million. And hence, a player that has 2 career goals scoring an 8-year contract worth $32 million in total. A lot of what came out from Kyle Dubas from various outlets, Michelle Crecchiolo of Pens Inside Scoop and others who were posting, I believe it was email responses that Kyle Dubas was sending out about this contract was, well, they believe in him and they're taking a little bit of a risk because they think this guy's going to turn into a bona fide middle six winger. And if he does, that contract in today's day and age is going to become a heck of a bargain. We just have yet to see it with our own eyes. So when I look at this entire situation, it was always strange how quiet it was, right? It kind of faded into the back because of all the other big headlines and big storylines that surrounded the Penguins. Your Jason Robertsons, your Jacob Trubas, you're moving up in the drafts, expecting to shell out a big package to get into the top 10 at the NHL draft. And then even after the draft, the story of the Rucks being drafted to the Penguins, them coming to Pittsburgh and participating in development camp, Evgeny Malkin re-signing, Igor Chinakhov re-signing. We seemingly forgot, hey, Ville Koivunen is still sitting there without a contract. He was a restricted free agent, but he wasn't arbitration eligible. So why is it taken so long to get this deal done? And now we know, because it's not a small deal. It's not just a throw it up on the board because, it's only a couple years and we can always work around it. It's an 8-year deal. And sure, yeah, you can work around it if it doesn't work out. You might be able to allocate it somewhere else. In fact, $4 million in 5 years is probably going to be the new league minimum, for Christ's sake, considering the way that this league is going. But still, no one expected to see 8 years for a guy who put up 2 goals and 7 points in half a season last year. Now, with that said, this doesn't need to be a whole out bashing of Ville Koivunen, because he does have a lot of upside. He does have a lot of potential, and he's only 23 years old. Right? This contract, if it pans out, carries him through until he's 31 years old. So you get him for the entire prime of his career. You essentially eat up a lot of his unrestricted free agency opportunity. So if it works out, it's probably going to wind up being a contract that we would look back and say, man, that's unfortunate for Ville Koivunen. But the Penguins bet on him, and he is betting that he can carve out a nice career for himself with the Pittsburgh Penguins. I would imagine, and Kyle Dubas said otherwise, but I would imagine that this makes him a virtual lock to make the roster. If he shows up to camp and he looks horrible, okay, maybe they try to send him down. But this is a guy in year one of an 8-year deal making $4 million a year. Historically, you don't send those guys down to the minors. The problem is you have a lot of other guys that did the same exact thing this offseason, that just signed contracts that have substantial price tags attached to them. So the question then that brings me to is, are we about to see a trade go down with the Pittsburgh Penguins before training camp, or maybe even before the season starts in late September? There is 6 forwards that you would have probably written in pen that signed contracts this offseason. Nicholas Robertson, who they just avoided arbitration with, Oneil Kuzmenko, who signed for $5 million. Yes, on a 1-year deal, but signed for $5 million. Igor Chinakhov, who is a lock to make the roster. I mean, the guy was on pace, if he would have played a full season at the way he was playing in Pittsburgh, would have scored nearly 40 goals last year. Evgeny Malkin, not going anywhere. And Connor Dewar, who again, not going anywhere. Your best, if not second best penalty killer, and a guy that can play center and wing. So that's 5 guys of your 12 forwards that just signed a contract. You can add in Blake Lizotte, who signed a deal just before the season came to an end. You can add Sidney Crosby because he's Sidney Crosby. And all of a sudden, you only have 5 spots left for Ville Koivunen to battle for. Ben Kindle, you could probably whittle it down to 4 because Ben Kindle's your third-line center, if not your second-line center. And forgot to mention with people that just signed contracts, Tommy Novak. Okay, so we're down to 3. Are you going to make Ville Koivunen your fourth-line winger? I mean, you could bench Soderblom. You could bench Brazeau. Neither of them played poorly at the end of last season, but I could see you giving Ville Koivunen an opportunity in favor of one of those guys. But it feels like, and I'm not sure what the return would be, maybe we're finally going to see a Rickard Rakell or, probably more so, or a Brian Rust trade. Definitely or. I don't think you trade both of them. There's been a lot of trade speculation in the last 2 years on both of them. And I'm not saying the Penguins need to trade these guys. But if you're reading the tea leaves, and I've done it incorrectly at times, I've done it correctly at times. But if I'm reading the tea leaves, this feels like foreshadowing that another trade is coming. That you're putting stock in Ville Koivunen to be one of your pieces throughout the entirety of the 2026-27 season. And then you add on the fact that you have Rutger McGroarty, who's expected to have a chance to crack the roster. Avery Hayes, another player that you would look at in that same light. Tristan Brose, maybe, you'd look at in that same light. They have a laundry list of forwards that could wind up deserving an opportunity this year. And a lot of them that are getting paid pretty handsomely this year and in the following years. Maybe there needs to be a move to make some space for some of these guys. Brian Rust, coming off a year where he scored 29 goals and 36 assists, finishing with 65 points in 72 games, just once again being that steady force atop the Penguins lineup. He's a good penalty killer. He's a locker room leader. And he's a guy that I feel like 31 other teams, if the Penguins were to open up the market for him, would be interested in trading for. Now, 31 other teams might not be able to, one, afford Brian Rust. Teams like the Stars have no space whatsoever. I don't think Vegas has any cap space because when do they ever? And I don't think all 31 teams have what the Penguins would be looking for in return. But at a base level, 31 teams would love to have Brian Rust on their team if the Penguins choose to try to shop him. And I think it's pretty similar for Rickard Rakell. He scored 24 goals, registered 24 assists for an even 48 points in 60 games. And that's after the fact that he missed a extensive amount of time due to I believe it was a broken wrist or a broken hand early in the season. This is a guy that picked it up to a different level late in the season, scored over 10 goals in the month of March, and showed the ability, if needed. I wouldn't say that this is a guy you go into a season expecting to be a center, but he showed the ability to play center last season. So while they don't have to make a move, while it is not imminent that the Penguins are making a move, things are just going to get really interesting over the next month, because it feels like you got too many cooks in the kitchen. And it feels like if somebody's going to get traded, yeah, you could trade Elmer Soderblom. You could trade Justin Brazeau. But does that open up a spot that would make sense for Ville Koivunen? It doesn't. The spots that make sense for Ville Koivunen are third line and up. And right now, third line and up are a bunch of people that just signed a contract extension. And then there's Rustin Rakell. So I'm not sure who would be on the other end. I'm not sure what the return would look like. But there's been speculation out there about Rustin Rakell, and I wouldn't be surprised to see that speculation come to fruition at some point between now and the beginning of the season. Again, it's still speculation on my part, but it feels like there's another shoe to drop when it comes to the Pittsburgh Penguins at forward. But that's going to do it for this episode of the Burgh Breakdown. Thank you guys so much for tuning into this one. Remember, you can find us on YouTube at Nick Belsky, or you can catch us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts at Burgh Breakdown. But that's it for episode 8 of Burgh Breakdown. Tune in on Tuesday of next week as we get you all set for Game 1 of the Steelers preseason action. We'll be joined by a very special guest on that episode. So make sure you check that out. Make sure that you like, subscribe, leave 5 stars. We really appreciate it here. I really appreciate it here at the Burgh Breakdown. But that's it for this episode. We'll see you guys next time.